key to peace.
The Eagle and the Bear. Dispatches from the Cold War. Dateline, 1983, Grenada.
Citizens of Grenada, military forces from neighboring Caribbean nations and the United States have arrived in Grenada to protect lives and restore order.
Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
For 1 week in October of 1983, Grenada became the center of the world's attention, the site of the first major U.S. military engagement since Vietnam, and a standoff between the U.S. and a perceived communist threat. Grenada had seemed an unlikely place for war. Its reputation was as a spice island, an enticing, idyllic holiday camp, where the citizens were more interested in bowling cricket balls at each other than in throwing bombs. Grenada had gained its independence from Britain in 1974, but the celebrations had merely put a false smile on a country that was struggling to find its political balance. The first Prime Minister, Eric Gary, had ruled the country as a ruthless dictator and developed little except a reputation for being fascinated by UFOs and pseudo-mysticism. But in March 1979, a young, London-educated attorney, Maurice Bishop, took over the island in a bloodless coup. This was the first step in a march towards conflict with the United States.
In Grenada, we have made it very clear that although we are a small, poor country, nonetheless we are determined to build our own path. We are determined to do so without accepting any outside dictation from anyone.
Bishop's path, which led towards socialism and was unfurled under the banner of Marxism-Leninism, did not please the United States government. They cut off Grenada's aid, and Bishop turned to Cuba and the Eastern Bloc for help. The Bulgarians helped the islanders with their farming. The Cubans and Russians gave economic and military aid. Many Western nations and international organizations also gave help because they respected Grenada's conservative economic policies and her surprising growth rate. But the more that Maurice Bishop embraced the Soviet Union, the more the U.S. watched in anger, especially when he was greeted so enthusiastically during a visit to Moscow in early 1979. President Reagan believed that Russia was gaining a further foothold in America's backyard, a second Cuba at the other end of the Caribbean.
He has a vision that goes back to the Monroe Doctrine, that somehow or the other, this Caribbean is part of an American lake, an American backyard, which frankly we do not accept.
U.S. fears were fanned after Prime Minister Bishop traveled to Cuba in August 1979 and persuaded Castro to provide men and money to enlarge the Port Saline airfield on the tip of the island. Bishop said they were making it large enough for international airlines. The U.S. government said it would be large enough, too, for military jets.
That tiny little island is building now, or having built for it, on its soil and shores, a naval base, a superior air base, storage bases and facilities for the storage of munitions, barracks and training grounds for the military. I'm sure all of that is simply to encourage the export of nutmeg. It isn't nutmeg that's at stake in the Caribbean and Central America. It is the United States national security.
The runway is the same length as St. Lucia's and smaller than that of Barbados. It is also a project which past United States and Canadian administrations have recognized as vital to the development of our tourist industry.
The rapid buildup of Grenada's military potential is unrelated to any conceivable threat to this island country of under 110,000 people.
How can the United States really be afraid of anything that could be in Grenada? I mean, how can that even be conceivable, except in the sickest of minds?
Bishop protested that the only Russian plane on the island was a crop duster. But he was clearly worried about the U.S. government's increasing hostility. In June 1983, he visited Washington for 10 days to try to calm the government's fears.
An ABC television crew came down to Grenada, and they discovered that they didn't have to go up into a spy plane to take photographs, that they can just go to the airport site and take photographs. They discovered that right at the tip of the runway was a medical school with 700 young American students earning their right to become doctors. That these young American students were running up and down the airport runway every day. It was their main jogging park. So as far as I am concerned, even before we got here, that particular piece of mythology had been blasted. But I would certainly hope that if there was any residue of doubt left, that the last 10 days would certainly have cleared it up once and for all.
But Bishop's efforts to make friends with the United States were not successful.
My government has consistently sought to establish and to maintain normal and mutually respectful relations with our powerful northern neighbor. It is an unfortunate historical fact that every effort on our part to achieve this has been ignored or rebuffed.
When Bishop returned home from his visit, he knew the threat from the U.S. had not subsided.
In exactly the same way that they have had to move to violent force against other popular progressive revolutions around the world, they are right now, this very minute, sitting down and planning the final stages of their armed attack against our revolution.
Fear grew. The militia was put on the alert, and Grenadians were urged to watch out for an invasion.
One of the pillars of the revolution is its national security. We have the United States government breathing down our throats, the most powerful country in the hemisphere, and one of the great powers of the world. Of course, with resources and everything like that, to try to topple us.
Ironically, the greatest threat to Prime Minister Bishop came not from the U.S., but from his own colleagues. October 12, 1983. A radical faction of Bishop's party, led by Bernard Cord and General Hudson Austin, turned against him. They accused Bishop of being too moderate. He was placed under house arrest. But they had badly underestimated Bishop's support among the people of Grenada. October 19th. The island was in an uproar. An angry crowd freed Bishop from house arrest as an amateur cameraman filmed the scene. Several thousand demonstrators assembled with Bishop at Fort Rupert, the Army's headquarters. But they were followed there by General Austin's troops. The troops opened fire on Bishop's supporters. Many died, and hundreds more threw themselves over the battlements, trying to escape the bullets. Bishop was lined up against this wall with 7 of his colleagues. The sound of 2 long machine gun bursts signaled the end of his revolution. General Hudson Austin went on the radio to announce a 24-hour curfew.
That our major task at this moment is to protect and defend our country against any attack by imperialism. Anyone who seeks to demonstrate or disturb the peace will be shot.
The stage was set for a final showdown between General Austin's radical communist government and a worried U.S. administration. October 1983, Grenada. The murder of Grenada's popular Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop, outraged many Grenadians. But the rebels, led by General Austin, enforced a dawn-to-dusk curfew, and there was little dissent. However, the bloody coup gave Washington the excuse it was looking for. On October 20th, President Reagan ordered a Navy task force that was heading for Lebanon to turn towards Grenada. October 24th. A final meeting about invading Grenada took place at the White House. The president said, "Let's go." October 25th, 5:37 a.m. Rangers parachuted in on the airfield at Point Saline. They were met by tracer fire from Grenadian anti-aircraft guns. The invasion had begun, and Americans were in combat for the first time since the Vietnam War.
United States paratroopers invaded at 5:40 this morning. Our armed forces are engaging them in fair battle. All Grenadians report immediately to our respective militia bases. Citizens of Grenada, military forces from neighboring Caribbean nations and the United States have arrived in Grenada to protect lives and restore order.
The early stages of the battle were the fiercest, with the American troops fighting to gain a foothold on the island. They used heavy firepower, and their aircraft constantly attacked the Grenadian positions, including the anti-aircraft guns at Fort Rupert. From a hotel overlooking the island, 2 Americans filmed the early stages of the invasion and caught a moment of tragedy.
Helicopter, right here. See him? Right over the point here.
He crashed into it.
Oh, my God.
He crashed right there. Here's another one. Yep, they got him. I don't know why they went in that valley.
President Reagan said one of the main reasons he'd sent the troops in was to rescue the more than 600 students who were studying at the American Medical School, St. George's University.
I can remember it was at 5:30 in the morning, and out of a dead sleep, I woke up and heard automatic machine gun fire and anti-aircraft guns. And it wasn't much longer after that a soldier came over the ridge, because we were sort of in a depression at the end of the airport, the very end of the airport, and shouted that he was an American soldier, and it was American forces that were landed, and they were going to secure the campus and take us out of there as soon as possible. And you heard a large cheer go up from the campus.
The students seemed pleased, relieved to be leaving an island paradise that had become caught up in a Caribbean whirlwind of confusion and gunfire.
If anybody back home has any problems with what the United States did, they can look at our lives and say they saved them, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Amen. It was worth it. I'm going to gladly pay my taxes for the rest of my life.
But the delight was short-lived. The Army discovered that only some of the students had been at the campus near the airport. 400 more were scattered around the island. They would wait, worried and frightened, as the battle waged. Some posed for snapshots on the roof and waved American flags trying to get the Army's attention. October 27, day 3 of the invasion. U.S. troops nervously entered St. George, the capital of Grenada. There was no resistance. The People's Revolutionary Army had fled, and the U.S. was in control. For the first 3 days of the invasion, the press had been banned from Grenada. Now they were finally allowed onto the island. Many of them complained bitterly, including ABC's Richard Threlkeld.
What this shutdown has done for a period is to allow only one side of the story to be presented, and that's the government side of the story. And the press is supposed to present all sides of the story, and if it can't get access to it, you get one side of the story, and that's what totalitarian societies are all about.
The fact of the matter is that when you are mounting a secret operation of this sort, in which you are extremely concerned about the safety not only of the troops you are using, but also of 1,000 Americans on that island who can easily become hostage, it is not wise practice, I think, to advertise or to, in fact, include anybody in that invasion plan that you don't have to include.
When the media did arrive, they discovered that all was not well with the 6,000 troops that had landed. They reported that many were suffering from low morale, didn't know why they were there, and lacked clear leadership. Subsequent military investigations would reveal that the troops had also been issued with inadequate maps and had to seek the students' help to be shown where to go. It was lucky that there were so few enemy soldiers. There were only 43 Cuban military personnel on the island, and the rest of the 784 Cubans were construction workers. Most of them were quickly rounded up. The military were triumphant. They finally managed to find the rest of the students, and they found something else they were looking for: large caches of arms.
2 hours ago, we released the first photos from Grenada. They included pictures of a warehouse of military equipment, one of 3 we've uncovered so far. This warehouse contained weapons and ammunition stacked almost to the ceiling, enough to supply thousands of terrorists.
We'll see the shipping cartons, which show that the destination or the origin of these weapons were either Cuba or the Soviet Union.
The discovery of the arms and the warm welcome from many Grenadians added justification to the United States' decision to invade.
The non-army people, the civilians who had been cooped up in their houses for a week and a half, showed every sign of being delighted that the Marines had showed up. They walked up to them with smiles on their faces and wanted to shake their hands.
But the invasion had not been without cost. The final tally was grim. 45 Grenadians killed, 337 wounded. 24 Cubans killed, 59 wounded. 24 Americans killed, 116 wounded, many of them seriously. Yet the invasion was being hailed as an enormous success in Washington. Communist expansion had been stopped. Grenada's revolutionary movement had been crushed. And all that was left was fading images. October 1983. In the days that followed the invasion of Grenada, U.S. troops arrested the communist leaders who had rebelled against Prime Minister Bishop. General Austin and Bernard Cord were flown to a U.S. warship for questioning. Life quickly returned to normal, and the people seemed pleased to see the American troops, although some Grenadians knew there was a cost involved.
Ultimately, we have to pick one bunch of friends or another. And there are also prices with friendship. Either way we go, we will have to play somebody's tune. For the time being, we like the music on this side.
Abroad, the reaction was very different. The Soviet Union's condemnation was to be expected, but the response from America's allies was far more worrying.
We on this side of the House, and I believe many on the other side, believe that America's action against Grenada was a catastrophic blunder, and that the failure of Her Majesty's government to prevent it was an unforgivable dereliction of duty.
Demonstrators took to the streets of Brussels, London, and Paris. In Latin America, too, the outrage was almost universal.
I immediately issued a statement vigorously condemning the armed aggression against Grenada. And we all understood that the invasion was a giant pretext used by the United States government, taking advantage of the commotion caused by the assassination of Prime Minister Bishop and the presence of the assassins in controlling Grenada to give a signal that it had again decided to use force in Latin America.
The United States government paid little attention to the criticism. Many Americans believed that a tougher image was something America needed, and President Reagan's popularity soared. He moved ahead to ensure that elections took place in Grenada, and was pleased when America's preferred candidate, the moderate Herbert Blaise, was elected Prime Minister in December 1984. U.S. money was also pumped into developing the island. This was a sudden switch from the government's earlier policy of strangling the island's economy. But President Reagan planned to use the island's invasion and transformation as an important issue in his 1984 presidential campaign. He was determined that having saved the island from communism, it would now become a model democratic and capitalist nation, helping to ensure his popularity. and winning him another 4-year term.
1 year ago, we liberated Grenada from communist thugs who had taken over that country. I am proud also to say that during these last 4 years, not 1 square inch of territory in the world has been lost to communist aggression.
And so the battle for Grenada, which lasted just a week in the fall of 1983, proved to be an American victory in the continuing conflict between the eagle and the bear.